Serbia is going through the largest protests that country has seen in decades, all triggered by an incident that happened back in November when what essentially was a canopy from a railway had collapsed, killing 15 and injuring 2. However, these protests go extremely far beyond what happened with that incident. There's a lot that is going on inside that country, and so seeing that not many media sources are covering what's happening here, what happened with that incident, and what's been going on for the past decade, I sat down and interviewed a ton of teachers, students, other professionals to see essentially what is happening. Because what is happening via what's being said of the state media is very different than what's actually happening on the ground. And I found that interesting because in today's social media world, the government was saying one thing, yet I'm seeing all of these peaceful protests and seeing, look, all these people are coming together, all walks of life. And they literally mean it. It started off as students and professors, and now we're seeing farmers, construction teams, you name it, moms, dads, grandparents, different generations coming together to see some kind of change inside that government. And so I figured, let's sit down and talk about it. Before we get started, make sure you subscribe, you turn on notifications, and you give this video a thumbs up. First, I need to give a shout out to every single person who reached out to me. I'm not exaggerating when I say I now have about 25 different people sending me photos and videos from the protests, which have been going on since November. But just recently, we've been seeing an explosion of these events in which there's actually another one happening on February 1st, in which it's going to be across multiple different cities. And it almost looks like almost every single person in the country are getting involved. But in today's conversation, we're going to break this down into really two different sections, because you've got the incident and what the list of demands are from that incident. But then we also have the underlying things that have been going on for the past decade plus. And so really, in order to understand one, you have to understand the other. And so the root causes of these protests go pretty deep. You know, obviously there's perception online that Serbia is just pro-Russia 100%. And that's not the case here. There's a lot that really goes on with it. So the four main points when it comes to these root causes include institutional collapse and corruption, a lot of corruption at the government level, a lot of laws not being followed, media censorship and propaganda in which the media is controlled by the state itself, by the current government, and so they only push their own agenda, their only propaganda, and not the stuff that's actually happening, which, believe it or not, has a lot of the younger generations turning to YouTube, turning to TikTok, Snapchat, and other platforms to really get messages and information really truly out there. And then you got election manipulation, in which there are people who are against the government for elections, and those people either get attacked physically or they get attacked by the media. And lastly, the European Union's role in all of this, because essentially, while the government in Serbia acts one way, Europe has a lot of going on inside of this, in which the people understand that Europe actually supports them more, yet their government kind of portrays things a little bit differently. And so I wanted just to break these 4 points down, and then from there, continue with the protests. So first, let's talk about the institutional collapse and corruption. Protesters agree that Serbia's government institutions are failing them. They're failing to fulfill their responsibilities, to political interference, to lack of independence. A lot of these things have kind of gone awry. And they want accountability for that. They want their government to follow the safeguards and the rules and things that are put in place to make sure that their government is fair and free. Something they feel that their current government is just not doing. And I know what you're saying. Well, couldn't they just have elections and get people put out of there? The Serbian people, their goal wasn't to really have an election and get things kind of put out there. They don't want the new phases per se. Instead, they want leaders to actually look at the rules and regulations and go, okay, we can't do this corruption stuff. We need to cut this stuff out. We need to do everything by the book, because when we do them by the book, things are done properly and correctly. And then, like the incident that just happened in November, things like that wouldn't have happened. And so there needs to be some kind of accountability, and corruption needs to go. Something that I know, if you read into the news in the past few years, there's been a decent amount of corruption inside that government. Next, when we're talking about corruption, you've got the media censorship and propaganda. Once again, the Serbian mainstream media is overwhelmingly controlled by the ruling party. Whatever the ruling party wants, they kind of push it. So you'll see a lot of their broadcasts giving out pro-government propaganda and then suppressing anything else that doesn't agree with it, okay? Whether it be everything from projects to just political things. Their mainstream media either suppresses it so that you don't hear it or bashes it so much to the point to where you believe that that other thing is so absolutely awful when realistically it's not the truth at all. And funny enough, in some of the rules and the corruption, everything going on, the state-funded news, which is actually the RTS, the radio television of Serbia, is supposed to be impartial news. But because of what the government is doing, it just became a government mouthpiece. And so students, once again, have turned to alternative media. Once again, YouTube, Instagram. Actually, Instagram is probably the biggest. And then, of course, TikTok. It's on these platforms in which the students are A, connecting, and B, exposing a lot of the falsehoods going on. I mean, going back, I keep bringing up the railroad incident, but that's a trigger here. Going back to that, there was a lot of things hidden. And as people were demanding answers, the government media was hiding it or putting out different agendas or different things, which made you go, well, that's not true. And so students were then, doing their own research, becoming their own independent journalists in order to uncover these things. And they're doing this in universities and in schools in which then they were able to get their teachers saying, look, you see this, right? You're seeing what's going on here, which is only prompting more of a change that needs to happen inside the government, which then gets us down to number 3, election manipulation, and sadly enough, political repression, in which if you spoke out against a certain government, maybe an election, something like that, there was so much either threats physically or verbally that it shut down these people. Also add in the fact that there was election fraud, including voter buying and intimidation, essentially intimidating people not to run or to force people to vote a certain way, which is super illegal, which goes back to the corruption. That should have never been a thing to begin with. A lot of that, believe it or not, stems back to public sector employees who was pressured into supporting the current ruling party, in which if you didn't do, there would be consequences. And, what would you do there, right? If you had the choice of, hey, keep your job, support your family by voting for the ruling party, or if you don't do that, your job is gone. You're done. What do you do there, right? You see how that corruption and manipulation is going on in where it's making an environment where these elections are just becoming fraudulent completely, and people cannot vote the way that they want to. So in a way, people going to the streets right now is their way of voting, saying, yo, we don't agree with what you're doing here. We need you to change. Which brings us to the last one, the European Union's role. And this is something I found very interesting. Why Serbia's current ruling party right now employs this nationalist rhetoric domestically. It maintains a very strong economic tie with the EU, receiving financial support, while at the same time eroding all these democratic norms, which are like, wait a minute, you're taking money from Europe, you need them to survive, but you're running things in a way that are not EU at all. And so many protesters are criticizing the EU for now turning a blind eye to the state of what Serbia is becoming in favor of economic stability. There should be some kind of accountability put on Serbia. That is what they're saying here. And so the EU's role in all of this could be many folds, where it's like, hey, if you guys don't make a change, we're going to withhold X, Y, and Z, and we're not going to do a certain thing. And so some of these causes are saying, yo, Europe, we're not really having much of a power here. You guys could do a lot here to help make this change, and you're not. Add in all 5 or 4 of those together, and you could see some of the root causes. There's actually a lot more that goes into it, But that's for the main point right now, which gets us ready for the protesters. There are about 4 different demands right now that the protesters want. These 4 are published online, and while their current government would say they already started doing some of these things, they're not at the levels in which fulfills these 4 obligations. These 4, just quickly in summary, include transparency. They want transparency on what happened to the railroad building itself. They want to know everything about the construction. They want all the documents published. Anything dealing with it, they want that stuff published. There's over 1,000 pages that deal with this construction of this railroad station. And realistically, out of all the pages, the government only released 195. And you see, the students and these protesters want to see that list because they want to see the corruption. They want to see who decided to cut corners here. Where was this money going? How much did it start with? Where did it go? And why did X, Y, and Z happen to cause this incident to take place? The Serbian government says we released the documents. They only released like maybe 10, 12% of the documents there. The students want all the documents, and they know the number. So it's not like they can release more of it and go, well, that's everything. They know how many are there. Next is justice for attacks on students and professors, because there's been multiple reports of students, professors being physically assaulted by individuals linked to the Serbian Progressive Party, or the SNS. We actually just saw that recently, because you may remember that there was an incident just a few days ago in which someone was attacked. This girl named Anna, I apologize, 20 years old. There was all these attacks, and turns out the person who did those attacks were related to who? The prime minister, which is why the prime minister actually resigned. That is clearly an example here. And so, that being said, they want justice for this. The protesters are demanding that these people be identified, prosecuted, and then completely fired from any role whatsoever, essentially removing people from corruption roles, which in this case is attacking students and professors. Next, number 3 is dropping the charges against those who've been detained because they're protesting peacefully, regardless of what the state media is saying inside that country, or you may be seeing online. These people are peacefully protesting, to the point to where we're seeing pictures and videos online of protesters even hugging the police, because even the police are understanding what's going on here. Everyone wants accountability. And so they want to get all of these dropped. All of these are being either in jail right now to be released, and those who are currently being processed with charges for that to also be released. And then lastly, they want to see a 20% increase in the higher education budget. Essentially, they want to make education more accessible and affordable for everyone. Because at this very moment, while there are some kind of programs, it's just too expensive. And they're definitely not at the EU standards. At this moment, I believe they're about 30 to 40% below those standards. I think at the current budget, they're 513 million. The next one, 20% more, is about another 100 million. So that's more money to make things potentially cheaper. The hope is to get it 50% cheaper so that more and more people could be educated about everything going on, which would eventually cause their country to grow. But that leads us to what is going on at this very moment, where we're at. As when I say what started off as just students has now snowballed into pretty much everyone in walk of life there. We're seeing, students, professors, we're seeing farmers come out. Farmers actually bringing their tractors to protect everyone who's protesting after there were some instances where people drove cars into people, which is awful. Now we're seeing parents and grandparents and different generations come out, kids, all protesting to make these changes in their country. And I had a great conversation with someone on the ground who really was telling me about this 24-hour blockade in Belgrade. And I will say, it's quite interesting on how close the country has gotten. It says here that in the 24 hours, remember, this was on top of highways and things like that. People provided free food, drinks, medical supplies. Farmers were cooking meals. Church groups donated thousands and thousands of homemade pretzels. Celebrity chefs came out and started making food for people. War veterans, priests, bikers, farmers stood ground at protests to prevent attacks on students. The atmosphere was overwhelmingly peaceful, with a shared determination for change. The country right now, as a country, not the government, but the country as a whole, is together, peacefully protesting for this change, which leads us to what's coming up next. And the next weeks, if not, definitely days, but next weeks, there's going to be a lot more escalation as the government refuses to fully address all of the protesters' demands. Serbia at this very moment, is at a turning point. Serbia at this very moment is at a large turning point. And the international community's recognition of this movement is extremely crucial. Because the more global attention they have, the more pressure on their government to make these changes. That's why I'm talking about this stuff. That's why I'm on TikTok putting videos online. And that's why I'm making, a 20-something odd long video for you for this. That's why I interviewed all of these people. Because Serbia's struggle is more than just a tragic incident here. It's really the fight for democracy and transparency and justice in a country where the institutions at this very moment have failed the people. And that's not okay. The government needs to work for the people so that things can move, so that country can be successful. And the protesters right now, that's what they want. They want to be able to have their fundamental rights to be respected. And their voices are growing louder every single day to make sure that not only does their government hear what's going on, but the world. They have a voice and it matters. Whew. I apologize for the video being really long, but we've been seeing this happen in a lot of countries. And Serbia right now is at the cusp of which this could happen. Big change could happen for that country. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. Please share this video and follow me for more.